Good evening, everybody, and welcome back. And you are watching another episode of Awoken with Aulden. I am your host, Aulden S. Nance, and we have a great show for you tonight and this evening as we are in the middle of the week. Currently, it is Tuesday, I believe January the 13th, I believe is today's date. Middle of January already. The month is already flying by as we continue into 2026 strong, about 9.5, 10 months away or so from the midterms this November. Have a lot of big stuff coming up this year for the United States, the politics, a lot of stuff going on globally, as we've already covered. Already been a big month in terms of the geopolitics side of things. We're looking at Nicolas Maduro kidnapped along with his wife in Venezuela, shipped back to the United States. Did live breaking coverage of that. Check that one out if you'd like. And we're looking at currently maybe one of the more strenuous times in the Iranian regime's most recent history with these protests going on. There's a lot of mixed numbers, mixed signals. It's really tough to tell what's really happening since they have their own state media, their own deal, and it's really the information war out there, especially online. And X right now is very, very challenging to decipher and slide through. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. Just a quick little tip. I'll get into the Iran protests for a couple of minutes before our main topic. But our main topic tonight wanted to get into some good. Let me step back 1 second, actually. So along with the Maduro kidnapping, we see the president also likely he's sensing over the holiday break. What probably happened is that they huddled and said, right now the numbers aren't looking good. This is probably the most unpopular the president has been during the second term, was around last December. Maybe the numbers have stabilized a little bit. However, they kind of see what's happening. They see what's happening with the party, and if stuff doesn't start correcting here in the next couple of months, it might not look good for the midterms, and they might not even have a legitimate case to make. So they likely gathered around and said, okay, what's our biggest weak spots, the blind spots, our biggest vulnerabilities? And it's of affordability. That's what the Dems are going to try run on as well, because truly still the housing market is tough for young people in debt and student debt. It's not looking sexy right now for a young American and their future and the hopes of the future. So the president announced the 10% on cap on credit card interest rates, which I'm sure will help a lot of young people, or it's at least designed to. We'll talk more about that tomorrow, and I'll get off on a little side tangent there. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, the president's 10% credit card interest rate cap. And he announced through a Truth Social post as well, but both of them were, that he's going to be trying to make homes more affordable for the younger generation, and is believing, I believe we'll read the exact post here tomorrow, but I believe it's something that deals with the BlackRock, Blackstone buying all these single family homes. He's going to try and make that harder for those major companies to do so. We'll have to learn more details and discuss that tomorrow evening on Awoken Wednesday with our guest. However, so yeah, back to the main point I was trying to make. They admin sees what's happening, the popularity ratings, whatever. So they're trying these new things, and we'll see. It's a revitalization. It's I think a lot of people are doing I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing. So we'll keep our eye on what's going on in that department. So you have the kidnapping, the credit card and home actionable ideas, and you're also looking at these Iranian protests, and just kind of everything being a little crazy at the moment, but regardless, the admin is at least trying to respond in some kind of way. They don't want to give it up. So, and the main topic tonight is another really America First driven idea, not even idea necessarily, rather victory, I'd say, if you are America First, with, I believe, last Tuesday or Wednesday or something like that, the president signed this executive order, or I believe it was an EO, announcing that the United States would exit 66 of these. Half of them were UN-backed organizations, and the other half were non-UN backed, or all UN backed, but half were official UN, the other half were sponsored / deeply embedded, heavy ties with the United Nations, a lot of these groups. And announced that the United States would be withdrawing from 66 of those organizations, which is the title of the episode, Exit 66. Kind of made it like Route 66, the long highway, and that stretches out west in the country. Always wanting to bring you good America First content. So before we really get into the thick of things, would like to remind you, if it's your first time on the live stream, if it's your first time checking out one of my videos, you see a reel, whatever, if you're watching on Twitch or watching on the X stream as well, or YouTube, please to remind you to please follow the pages and subscribe to the pages. Please leave a like, leave a comment on something you either agree or disagree with, or way that you think I can make the show better. So we are going to go full steam ahead. So I'll do a couple minutes on the Iran protests and what's going on with that. If you watch my prediction episode, that's probably the most in-depth I've gone on the recent history of the conflict, really. You have these two main countries in the Middle East that are still standing, that haven't been totally destroyed or had significant regime change or something like that, essentially. And it's Iran, the over 90 million plus population, in the Islamic Republic, and you have the Israel and the Israelis, around, I think, less than 10 million, like 9 million people or something like that live there. Very tiny, and it's a very tiny strip of land, size of New Jersey. No significant natural resources or advantages, whatever. But I digress. Those are the two countries, and along with Iran's proxies in Lebanon, Yemen, and the Gaza Strip. So let's go into, when did these protests begin? I mentioned on the prediction episode, a couple days after Christmas, I believe, probably 26th, 27th, 28th, maybe. One of those dates in the United States. One of those states just worldwide. In the United States, we're always a day behind. It's like it's already tomorrow over there. That's why on New Year's Eve, we're always the last country, last area on Earth to have the new year ascend into the next calendar year. So leave that aside for a second, and you have these protests have been going on more or less about 2.5, 3 weeks now, and it seems that the regime, at least at the moment, has been able to stabilize and remain stable. Excuse me. For the time being, at least, that Khamenei and the mullahs and the IRGC and other regime forces have been able to at least contain to where the protests haven't grown way too out of control or something like that. And what are they protesting? I mentioned it. It's the currency collapse. I believe that it's like yesterday or the day before, the dollar over there, whatever their official currency is worth zero with the euro. It matches up zero along with the euro. So the currency is not worth really anything over there right now. And a slap in the face to the protesters, rather, is that the regime would offer, I believe, $7 a month if you stayed home or something, and that's not really anything. So they're bankrupt. They have very little economic activity and income and future over there. They really have like oil. Still, oil is really all they are able to do right now, and that's through the Strait of Hormuz, which we know about. We've talked about the Strait of Hormuz before on the show. And so no money, the currency is worthless, there's heavy sanctions. If you saw, the president yesterday announce a 25% additional tariff or sanction to countries conducting business with Iran. So the maximum pressure campaign has really grown. It's ascending so rapidly. It's getting to where, and this is only a couple months old, that the snapback sanctions in Europe have been applied after the abandoned discussions with the IAEA over the nuclear program. So their hands are starting to get tied, but they're not totally screwed yet, because I've mentioned they have levers. They have pressure release levers that they can always pull in case of emergency, and that's closing the Strait of Hormuz, unleashing the proxy network. Which one of the proxies doesn't really matter. Have one of them attack, have one of them help. The IRGC, at least to what we know at this point, is still functioning. It's being funded. As long as Khamenei and the mullahs continue afoot that bill, the security force will be there. The regime won't be super threatened. So they have, and they have the ballistic missile program. They have those four things really going for them at the moment, and that makes it tough for the regime to totally go under. And we're hearing a lot of rhetoric from the president, though. It's been cooking up. It's about 3 weeks ago, once the protests began, put the pot of water on the stove, and now you're starting to see some of those bubbles start to ascend and rise up and elevate to the top, and it's starting to get a little steamy, where it could just be rhetoric. We know the president has already taken military action against them last June, an Operation Midnight Hammer. So they know that it's not, the Iranians have to know that it's not completely off of the table. So it's really keeping them guessing and just trying to make it as confusing as possible. That's what I think the president's trying to do, because, as I mentioned, the operations last June decimated a lot of the IRGC top leadership. They have backups in, the people that have replaced them So it's really trying to stress the regime as much as possible and make it almost like whack-a-mole, the arcade game you play at Chuck E. Cheese or Soup Mr. Gaddy's or Gaddy Town or whatever child's arcade at slash halfway theme park you go to as an adolescent. And the regime, they're trying to play whack-a-mole, and every time maybe they get a protest under control, but now the president is being uncertain about, well, am I going to strike them again? And once they close that hole, something else sprouts up. Now there's threats from another country or something like that. Maybe there's attacks in the Red Sea. The Houthis are under pressure from the Southern Transitional Council, or the Lebanese parliament votes to disarm Hezbollah again, or something like that. So you kind of see where this is going. You always want them to, the strategy, I think is to continually force their stressors and eventually have them give out or panic into a decision to where they attack first. And that gives, if they attack first, that gives the green light for justification. Because let's go back to the Venezuela opportunity that we discussed on a couple, like maybe 2 weeks ago. And even Iraq in 2003, and all of these interventions, they're really, the government, it's almost like when a head coach in the NFL gets fired, or when the organization decides to move on from a coach, and they already know who they're going to hire already. They at least have a top candidate in mind that they're 95% certain, or even 99% certain they're going to hire. As long as they do the interview and don't prove to be some schizo and private or whatever, they're going to get the job. So just think of it as the NFL team as a regime. The Baltimore Ravens, you saw the owner come out today saying even if the Ravens won the game against the Steelers a week ago, that he would have been fired if they lost this week. Same with the Steelers, with Mike Tomlin. If they lost last week, he was going to get fired, and he left this week. Whatever. So the teams already have, and same way with the governments. So really, in Venezuela, there always has to be something to where it gets it to the point where the public has to eat it. Whether it's, they're building the nuclear weapon, or it's a narco-terrorist, or it's they want to kill all the puppies on Earth. Whatever the excuse, there has to be some kind of public draw to it, to where they can't just flat out say, we want to topple this government because it helps us strategically. No, it would be hard to sell that, right? So they have to think of something like Maduro's this biggest narco-terrorist. We're going to blow up all these narco-terrorist boats. When we really know it was about leverage against China and oil and resources, right? Yeah, let's be honest. So same with this. So back to the main point I was making about the Iranians is the president might already know what's going to happen. He maybe has already made up a mind, and it doesn't really matter what the other side does or says. They're going to try and do an attack maybe. So if they can get, and the buy-in this time is trying to pressure them into attacking first. If they attack first, then that's like, these poor people have just been attacked. We need to fight them. Something like, you kind of get the drift there. So that's where we're really heading, I believe, with that. I might do we'll see what happens next week. Might do a full, maybe next Tuesday, might do a full episode on it, do some more background research on the protests and see what happens within this next week. So we'll keep monitoring the situation in the Islamic Republic. Absolutely. So that's the little spiel about the Middle East for tonight. And wanting to get into the main topic, just a reminder, if it's your first time on the live stream, please like and subscribe to the channels. I would deeply appreciate your support, and I really have enjoyed this. Started out as just kind of a fun little something to do, honestly, but now it's something that I'm taking a lot more pride in, taking this a lot more serious, wanting to give the viewers excellent information about what is happening in the world and this great country that we all live in. Okay, so without further ado, we will hop into exit 66. And so I mentioned got a comment from OOB underscore stream hub underscore world. Looks like a little robot or a beatbox or something. All right, wonderful. Okay, so we will dive into tonight's presentation. A little background. Reason it's 66 because 66 organizations were ditched by the Trump admin. About half of them were UN backed. They're all UN backed. Half of them were UN sponsored, rather. The other half were deeply tied with the United Nations. So here are a list of the organizations from the non-UN official side of things. You're looking at about, I believe, 10 or 11 maybe of these groups, and they all have those things in common, right? Maybe they're not all the devil, maybe they're not all the worst thing that's ever existed, for sure. But yeah, well, so the little format of the presentation tonight is that I'll have a slide with the groups, so you can look these groups up yourself. I have 60 of the 66 throughout. You can go online, check out the other 6 groups for sure. However, this is just for you to see, check out what's going on. You can look up some of these groups yourself, do some research. So the way I divided it up additionally is you have I have the list, and then I picked one from all of these little pockets. I divided them up into and did some research on one of the groups. One of the organizations I did a little additional search on is the IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. Some of the stuff this group did was it was a global coordination on renewable energy policy, often issuing roadmaps and structured guidance on what to do, gave it to governments, other government bodies. However, there was no way to enforce any of these recommendations or accountability if they were taken and used by the governments. Our involvement in this specific organization, we joined it in 2010. That's under Barack Obama, the 44th president of the United States, and paid a boatload of money into the organization. However, there was no way since there was no enforcement. You want to see this a lot with the environmental agencies. China, India, all of these other countries would not comply or ever really gave a crap to comply. So we were neutering ourselves. An additional, so I did a couple for the first pocket. The 24/7 carbon-free energy compact. And something that's funny about this group is that we were the only country on Earth to officially join it. It was, or it is, it's not like the group collapsed. However, majority of the participants in it are cities or companies. Maybe some are in the United States, some are worldwide. And it really made it difficult for some of the justification for the United States being in it, because one of the goals was to have hour by hour, I took some additional notes on it, hour by hour matching of electric consumption. Trying to put that back into the environment and the energy behind that, looking at and matching electricity use with carbon-free energy by the hour. And however, there was no financial incentive. The United States did not get any special treatment because of this. No financial assets. Got some social capital, maybe, and that's really what we're looking at here. The status capital, and no trade advantages either. We joined the pledge under the Biden regime in 2021, and it was just a lot of unrealistic goals and stuff to go along with it. Here's a screenshot from their website that I pulled out. Look at some of these other groups. This is just a sliver of it, and that's the map of the White House. So look at some of these other companies or cities or whatever they are, just for a little guide point for you. However, we were the only official country to join the group and the organization. So that's just a little visual for you. And another group that I took a look at was the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And they had a land acknowledgement on their website. So that tells you about all you need to know about this group pretty quickly if you're paying attention. So I'll let you read that for a second before I move on to the next pocket of non-UN groups that we have been a part of and that have left. So all of these groups I'm talking about, we're in the process of withdrawing or not in them any longer. Got another comment from at ZMOS2412. Yo, what's up? Love joining your podcast the other night, brother. That was a lot of fun. Seemed like a great launch. Yeah, if you're into sports at all, I know this show typically covers geopolitics, politics, and current events. However, if you do like sports commentary, I recommend you follow Zach's channel. He launched his first show was last night. His first podcast, I should say, wasn't live. He is going to do a sports podcast on current sporting events, do recaps on all of the playoff games, give you predictions, and what to look forward to in the sports world. So I'd highly recommend Mr. Z Sports, I believe is the name of the podcast. So the next pocket that we're looking at is non-UN governance, law, and democracy pocket. These four organizations are, again, I'm not trying to say everything these groups are doing or have ever done are the worst thing that's ever happened. However, they were not in America's vital interest to be a part of these groups. An IDEA, International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. So this guy, we were not even an official member of the organization. So we were paying money, tens of millions of dollars into this group and had no say on what the group did. Was not even an official member, had no voting power for the direction that the group ever wanted to go in. And the only leverage we had was the threat to leave the IDEA. So not a great idea to join something you can't even vote in. Are you kidding? Pissing away tens of millions of dollars. Yeah, no way to control outcomes. Can't vote on priorities, and the reforms can't get any attention that way. Next pocket, non-UN development aid and economic coordination. So a lot of these groups, again, some of them might have helped in some ways. However, and you're going to notice a common theme so far if you haven't already. Paying tens of millions of dollars to be in the group often doesn't directly benefit American interests. Sometimes we're not even have no power within the group itself because we're not even officially tied in. We're just giving them welfare when, as I mentioned, the economic conditions to start the show is you have young people that are just kind of checking out of society. They're not caring anymore. So that's a much bigger problem. So the Colombo plan. So this group, and this is one that I'll give it a little credit. At the time, maybe made more sense because we've talked about the Cold War before, the ties with Somalia, Greenland, the desire to acquire Greenland, and all of that jazz. So we know that there was a different time, different headspace coming out of the Second World War, right? You have baby boomers, so they're starting to grow a little bit, and founded it during the Cold War. And we did participate in the group and funded it for several decades. But now it's not really as needed because what the group was desired to do was to promote democracy in Asia and Western Asia and around Central Asia as well, talking east of Iran, like Pakistan and Uzbekistan and all of these countries that don't have any democracy at all. So here's a map of the groups and the organization. Just take a look at it. So you have the United States all the way over here. We're funding it. And you got Chile. And so you got two countries on the Western Hemisphere participating. And even though you have other Western civilization countries such as Australia, of course, and Japan, right? Or at least Western aligned. The other countries like Saudi Arabia, they're not a democracy at all. And going back to the Iran protests for a second, it's not about liberating Iran from the mullahs and the regime. Remember how we ran cover when that Jamal Khashoggi was chopped up like Mr. Potato Head a couple years ago? maybe around a decade ago now, chopped up into pieces, and nothing really ever came of that. Saudi Arabia, it's an authoritarian theocracy, Islamist theocracy as well. They're not promoting democracy one bit. Same with Iran, the mullahs. Nepal, they just had their government just got overthrown a couple months ago. Regime change in Nepal. So a lot of these countries are not really aligned with it. It doesn't really make that much sense anymore today. So another good decision by the president to pull back from this. And Pakistan. Next little pocket, the United non-UN security, counterterrorism, and cyber pocket. You hear about this all the time, especially since the global war on terror. We need to do all this security stuff. Another one's going to happen. Mushroom cloud if Saddam gets the bomb, whatever, right? So just take a quick little look at the groups, and we'll move on to the case study. Global Counterterrorism Forum was the one I selected. We helped found the group in 2011. And right, we're only a decade after 9/11, so there's still more of that stigma and feel going on. And it developed good practices to hopefully maybe do some of this counterterrorism stuff. But another group that I looked at, this is not the same group. The Global Forum on Migration and Development. So here's how we were paying money into this organization, tens of millions of dollars, hosted events, funded events, did all of that jazz. And one of their big, in a memo in 2020, I believe, this was their memo, is the term illegal migrant should never be used. I'm just reading the entire thing to you right now. Quote, the term illegal migrant should never be used as any other person. Migrants are not illegal. They are in an irregular situation or undocumented. The term illegal is not accurate. It is misleading, contributes to negative stereotypes, and criminalizes immigrants. And I won't read it all, but they want to, it's more talking points for the globalists to push mass immigration onto these populations. And you're seeing it. It's really happening in Europe and the United States and Canada. The NATO countries, more or less, are dealing with this mass migration crisis. Whether it's refugees coming from the Middle East or Northern Africa, or more in the United States, from the Caribbean, South America, Venezuela, wherever. So this is what's going on with that. And we were paying money into this as this problem continues to get worse and worse. Non-UN science and technical cooperation. Take a quick look at the groups there. Science and Technology Center in Ukraine. Right? You have all of this stuff going on, especially with the war over there right now. It seems a little fishy. And the group I chose was IAI, Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, regional climate science coordination body. We've been a part of it since the early 90s. And one of the big things is that the research was cited in these policy debates and government bodies and wherever without, again, these groups never have to face accountability because they're not officially in the UN, and they just get money from the UN. So there's never any risk to these companies or these groups, for the most part, rather. Now let's head into the United Nations backed groups. Economic development and planning. Take a quick little check out of those guys. And the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA, the core UN Department for Global Economic Planning. We joined in 1945 as a part of the United Nations. It's not a treaty body, and it was funded through the UN regular budget. However, we paid about 22% of this. We paid over a fifth of the entire group for the world, all the countries in the UN. We paid over a fifth of it to keep it funding, keep all employees paid, the research it conducted, etc., and helped produce Agenda 2030, funded through mandatory UN contributions. And it's not through voluntary, though. So we were mandated to pay this organization. And roughly every year, that's about $350 to $400 million every year we're paying into this. Congress has never voted on it. And it promotes world economic situation and prospects. Looking now into UN Climate, Energy, and Environment, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and UN Oceans, UN Water, some of these other groups, UN Energy. UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We joined in 1992. It was ratified by the Senate under George H.W. Bush. And voluntary commitments evolved into pretty well mandatory expectations. About $10 to $15 million every year we would pay into it. And uneven climate obligations that constrain the U.S. more than competitors. One of the key things with this is that the China and India were considered as developing nations, and enforcement is reputational, not reciprocal. Voluntary commitments lead towards mandatory compliance pathways, and these decisions are not treaties, but used by regulators. So essentially an official, not official deal. Now let's get into the human rights and identity and social policy, UN entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women, the Population Fund, Democracy Fund, all of this great stuff. Case study, UN entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women, created in 2010 to help with the UN gender policy, and it issues framework for how to treat women for these countries. We do know in a lot of these Islamist countries in the Middle East that women do not really have any rights at all. If you go outside, the religious police will scoop you up and your husband will beat the tar out of you. That's just their society. Funded through voluntary contributions. However, likely we've paid over $300 million into the body. We've been always one of the top 3 donors historically. Annual contributions about $20 through $40 million on average. Soft law gender frameworks, including domestic institutions without consent. And there's no legislation, however, so there's nothing that makes this official or any law. and it produces gender budgeting frameworks, coordinates with World Bank and regional courts, and language migrates into corporate DEI standards. Now we're going to look into the UN Children Conflict and Moral Authority group, the pocket, I should say, rather, the Office of Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict, the UN Children's Fund, Violence Against Children. So in principle, some good stuff, right? As I was trying to say, it's not that these, I've said this a couple times now, I'm not trying to say that everything that's ever been done by all of these groups are purely evil, or maybe at a time weren't worth being a part of it, even maybe, or something like that. However, we will look here. Excuse me. Yeah, just a little more information. Here, go to the case study that I selected. Office of Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. The office was created in 1996, and we accepted the mandate as a part of being in the United Nations. The office focused on children and armed conflict, as well, and monitors would provide reports on grave violations against children. So I'm sure this office or this organization, for example, and we've talked about Sudan before on the show, the very sad and unfortunate conflict happening over there right now, essentially a genocide and mass killings daily by these two groups that can't agree on who the next dictator of Sudan should be. Funded through the UN regular budget, and we would generally, the United States would provide several million dollars every calendar year annually. Small budget, but a large reputational impact. Naming and shaming mechanisms without due process or appeal if there was anything that the group did wrong. And the moral authority not equal with legal authority. Publishes a list of shame, influences, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure, and no judicial standards or evidence-based rules. Next pocket, the UN Peacebuilding, Justice, and International Law, the ILC, International Law Commission, Peacebuilding Commission, Peacebuilding Fund. The case study I chose for this one was the International Law Commission, established in 1947, that would codify international law, and it drafts the treaty language and customary international law. It's funded through the UN regular budget. However, this is one of the ones that the United States did not contribute annually as much, in the low millions of dollars. So we're still talking millions of dollars being low, and that's still a lot of money, of course. And customary international law developed without legislators or legislation. It draft articles later used in treaties. Courts cite this ILC commentary to this day, and customary law bypasses ratification. Looking at in the next pocket, UN training, coordination, and bureaucracy. UN Institute for Training and Research, the United Nations University, and a couple others. UN System Chief Executives Board for Coordination, the CEB. We joined in 2001 the United States participation was automatic through UN agencies. No separate budget. However, it was funded indirectly through UN agency budgets. So indirect but systematic exposure by the United States, and a transitional bureaucracy aligning policy without democratic oversight. Shared by the Secretary General and lines messaging through the World Health Organization, UNDP, UN Women, groups such as that, and international governance with no transparency. Great, so that's the presentation. So I hope you were able to gather some information. And again, that's the list of the 66 groups that the United States left, or is at least in the process of leaving through that executive order last week. Let me go back to full screen. So wonderful. And we're really looking at a time where, let's go back to the main point I started at the beginning of the episode, is that the admin is seeing this kind of the affordability issue, something they're going to have to take on. They're going to have to put a lot of effort into it. And I wish they'd talk about this stuff a little more. This is saving money annually to especially the non-UN groups, like the carbon 24, the 24/7 carbon group that we talked about first, that we were the only country on Earth to officially be in that pact. Just a lot of these just didn't make sense. And I hope you saw the common theme with them all is that the United States had never really had the full authority in these all the time, that we would be paying money into them, and if we did not have a vote in it or cannot directly influence stuff, or there's no way to even say that these groups were effective or working or doing their purpose. And we still know it's the same countries that have been fighting forever that are still fighting. It's a culture thing. Sadly, it's the government corruption. And even with Venezuela, for example, even though a lot of people don't consider the Latin American countries to be, quote, Western civilization, they're more westernized than Iran or Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Taliban, groups like that. So even when there are a lot of problems in those countries, they can be fixed, I say in quotes, a little easier than some of these ones overseas, particularly Africa, right? Africa, the more countries we do on Africa, the more you just realize that these groups, a regime will come in for a decade, not seen as legitimate. Ultimately, at the end of the day, gets tossed, and the cycle repeats. So I will be happy to take any questions or comments from the audience tonight. And a reminder is that we will be back with you tomorrow night for our guest. So I guess I can tease a little bit for tomorrow night, is that we will be talking about the free market, the economy, the economic system as a whole. We'll at least discuss some of the questions that I brought up to you at the beginning of the show about youth home ownership seeming out of reach, the credit card debt, student loan debt, all of these other burdens on young people right now that I'm sure other generations had to go through. However, this feels a little different, though. So we're going to talk about maybe what are some of the ways that, other than just complaining about it, what are ways that can be done to maybe fix it or improve the situation, those situations as well. So I'm bringing on a friend of the show, Andre, big guy into economic policy. Really, this is his kind of bread and butter. So happy to bring him on and share his insights and analysis with the Awoken. Hopefully, to maybe you can become awoken to a maybe a untraditional economic system. That's what I believe he'll most likely try and pitch. And you'll have to come back tomorrow and check it out, what he has to say. Check the messages, see if anyone texted in a question. Not tonight. Doesn't look like it right now. So, yeah, let's go ahead and just leave that for tonight because we'll be back tomorrow. Just wanted to trying to get a couple episodes out per week, at least now, to try to get some more content build up, really try and start building up the show a little bit more, get some more subscriptions, get some more followers, likes, all that good jazz, to where I can continually enlarge the program. So I'll wait around another couple seconds, see what's going on. Got a couple people on tonight. I wonder who that individual on Twitch was. Haven't had someone on Twitch make a comment before, so that's pretty exciting to see that. That's good that it's working. Because when I first set it up, I thought maybe it's just the Abyss. However, it's you. Yeah, I have no idea who that individual is. However, hopefully he becomes a common viewer of the show. That would be very nice to start building up a little bit of a fan base and get that community going, become a little something that people can look forward to, because right now for young people, some of that stuff, as I mentioned, is a little challenging. So sometimes maybe you have this unique online community that you join. Okay, so I think I am going to check one more time for text or something. All right, looking like just going to end it right there. So thank you for tuning in tonight and watching the stream. Hopefully you learned something about the UN and some of these organizations I did case studies on, did some research on. Happy to bring that to you. Hopefully you kind of got a bigger picture of why at least a good chunk of these groups were not serving the American interests, we're not America first. So with that, you have been awoken with Aulden. All right, much love, everybody. Good night. We'll catch you tomorrow for a talk about the economy.